Best of luck, Carrie.
Well, the moon is broken and the sky is cracked. Come on up to the house. Only thing you see is all that you lack. Come on up to the house. How you crying, you know, don't do any good. Come on up to the house. Come down off the cross, you know, can't use the wood. You gotta come on up to the house. Come on to the house. Come on up to the house. The world is not my home, we're just passing through. You gotta come on up to the house. There's light in the tunnel, there's no wine in the fire. Come on up to the house. He's singing lead soprano in a junk man's choir. You gotta come on up to the house. There's lots of nasty, so brutish and sharp. Come on up to the house. The seas are stormy, but I can't find a port. We gotta come on up to the house. Come on up to the house. Come on up to the house.
Good morning and welcome back to FET Live. So you are very welcome to this session this morning on Thursday for Transformation Thursday. So in this session, we're going to take some reflections. Do you include or exclude? And we have the absolute pleasure of being joined with both Carol Neenan and Carrie Archer. So first off, I am delighted to introduce Carol Neenan to FET. So Carol is the Active Inclusion Officer for Cork ETB, appointed back in December 2019. Carol commands a leadership role within her organisation to promote, maintain and enhance inclusive practice across the entire FET provision. 42 plus colleges and centres in total, and occasionally collaborates with the schools division also. This role allows Carol to effect a myriad of positive changes for those in need of support as well as those providing the support. Carol has a vast array of experience in education and beyond. Her special duties and assistant principal posts in further education have had her work as a course director, department head, staff induction officer, lifelong learning festival coordinator, statistical reviewer of access and progression, health and safety coordinator, NIPT facilitator, champion of disability, literacy assessments, and learning support coordinator. Carol stepped into her inclusion role on foot of over 30 years teaching varied elements of psychology, statistics, childcare, anatomy and physiology, and nutrition in 3 of the further education colleges in Cork ETB. She's an advocate for mental health awareness, holistic therapies, herbal medicine, and educational psychology. Carol is committed to increasing the scope of active inclusion wherever she goes. Carol's motto is, "The impossible just takes a little longer." Carol, you are so welcome to FET.
My name is Carol Neenan and I've been asked to talk to you about active inclusion. I've spent the last 17 months working as the Active Inclusion Officer for the Cork Education and Training Board. For the next 17 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about the promotion of active inclusion, some insights from my own experience working in Cork, and suggestions on how to keep the inclusion momentum going. I'll tell you a snippet of the history of my role, a good portion of what my job entails, some of the work done, and a glimpse into what I think is about to come. Before I took up this role, I had spent over 30 years teaching psychology, childcare, anatomy and physiology, and much more in 3 of our 5 further ed colleges. I have a vast array of experience of coordinating different departments and courses in these colleges, and working many different posts of responsibility. Example, Induction Officer, Lifelong Learning Festival Coordinator, Statistical Review of Access and Progression, Health and Safety Coordinator, Champion of Disability, and Learning Support Coordinator. In my spare time, I could be considered to be a serial learner because I have accrued a list of qualifications that's much too long to mention. And the only reason I am mentioning them here is to show that I have remained a student, I have remained a learner for my entire career, studying at every level imaginable. Just a brief history. The Cork ETB is the 2nd largest ETB in the country with approximately 40,000 learners by day. We are committed to providing a pathway for every learner, whether they're in our schools provision or in any of our 42 FET colleges and centres, both in urban and rural locations. Like most ETBs, our FET sector is made up of learners aged 15 to 80 years plus, attending apprenticeship programs, further ed colleges, youth reach centres, back to education, community training centres, literacy groups, and youth group programs, accredited and non-accredited programs. To give credit where credit is due, active inclusion came to life in the Cork ETB in about 2017, thanks to the persistence and commitment of Liz Moynihan, the director of our further ed college in Kinsale, and John Fitzgibbons, our director of FET. They put their heads together and contacted ahead to get a pilot programme for inclusive practice in our 5 further ed colleges up and running. The Active Inclusion Network was formed. This was a group of approximately 15 people, champions of disability and disability officers from within the further education colleges. AHEAD trained all of us in UDL, and we met regularly and collaborated to get a comprehensive view of where inclusion was at in our colleges, who was doing what, where, and how. The work we did was published and offered to advise the present FET strategy. One of the recommendations of this group was to create a new role at head office level dedicated to working in active inclusion. In December 2019, I was appointed to the role as Active Inclusion Officer for the Cork ETB. Just as I was about to set out on my new adventure, one single staff member among approximately 4,000 in a huge organisation. In fact, just the day before, I gave my last class, which would release me from the further education college I was teaching in. The first wave of COVID hit. We were all sent home with varying levels of technological wizardry, not to mind the variations in hardware and connectivity that we had. Little did we know what was ahead of us. To coin an old phrase, 'tis an ill wind that doesn't blow someone some good. Before COVID, if one had mentioned inclusion, a larger number of responses and discussions would have focused on people with disabilities. Since even the first lockdown, people, including teachers, tutors, instructors, and managers, are much more personally aware of just how difficult it is if you cannot connect or participate like everyone else. And this has increased the collective perception of what inclusion is about. So where do we begin with the promotion of active inclusion? Raising awareness first involves the gathering of a lot of information and then providing a platform on which to share it. Again, taking AHEAD as one of our role models, we did this with our online conference in November to December 2020. But one also has to consider what it is that needs to be shared and how it's going to be received by the many and varied stakeholders involved. Thinking with my teacher's hat on, templates for QQI components like communications and personal and professional development, they were magic. But thinking with the active inclusion hat on, it's got to be the UDL digital badge training. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But there is more to inclusion than what happens just in the classroom. And it's imperative that we stay connected with what's happening in people's lives. Anxiety is pervasive amongst our learners and the staff that support them. Varied and creative solutions will need to be positioned going forward, and those that prove effective can expect to be relied on for a very long time to come. So what does the job of Active Inclusion Officer entail? What kind of skills might be needed for promoting inclusion? To begin with, there's the collaborating and networking across the ETB and with colleagues throughout the country, collaborating on the UDL handbook, the ETBI position paper on active inclusion, and working with a colleague in another part of the country on a presentation for principals and centre managers explaining UDL. Keeping the learner as the central focus, while also raising awareness of learner difference and supporting the teachers, tutors and instructors in up-to-date and effective ways to support such learning difference. Did I mention giving presentations locally and nationally to pockets of people in my own ETB, to similar groups in other ETBs, and of course for events like this that command a special audience, a community of practice? While getting up to speed on who is who and what happens where, there must be some kind of forward planning and vision for the future, and this must include a variety of options to suit everyone in the audience. Training teachers on learner difference doesn't come any better than the UDL digital badge. This user-friendly, practical course changes people's mindset without overloading anyone in the process. It represents the needs of the learners and that of the busy FET teachers, tutors, instructors, or indeed managers that support them. Facilitating the UDL course is probably the singular most significant exercise in advancing inclusion actively. Managing the Solace FSD fund and its associated supports and paperwork takes up a good portion of time, as does supporting the teachers trained and training in in-house literacy assessments. Formal and informal networking by email, phone, and of course Twitter goes side by side with posting on WorkVivo and keeping principals, centre managers, AEOs and colleagues up to date with what is happening and what's available. But perhaps one of the most satisfying aspects of the role of my role is connecting people with each other to provide what are sometimes creative solutions to issues that arise. I have been very lucky that the universe has often landed just the right person in my line of vision and at just the right time. So let's have a look at some of the work done. Apologies to those of you who may have heard some of this already. Starting from the bottom rung of supports provided, our TEL coordinator for Raisa created a Moodle button within Office 365, so our learners would only have one username and one password to navigate for the year. Once this was in place, our study hub, our study supports, and even emotional supports all became virtual, and platform and TEL supports were available every day. Workshops popped up to answer questions being posed by our learners. Example, what is this thing called a brief? How do you write an essay? And please explain Harvard referencing. Teachers throughout our organisation were trained in the Woodcock-Johnson and can now assess people's reading, writing, spelling and math with pinpoint accuracy, allowing us to provide reasonable accommodations efficiently and appropriately. For those at the top of our inclusive pyramid, we also trained teachers in diagnosing specific learning difficulties. And for those who warrant this, it opens the door for them to avail of the Solace FSD fund, positioned to support the learner's independence while attending further ed. So that's a snapshot of what's been done. Now we must keep the progress in inclusive practice active. To keep anything active, you must keep it moving in a forward direction. First, you identify a starting point. You raise awareness about whatever it is you want to highlight, and then you ask for feedback. Provided you listen carefully to this feedback, which will hopefully have been gathered from several different perspectives, then you can endeavour to embed that learning. After that, you begin again, but this time from a more informed and experienced position. So, what changes in approach occur from this? What kinds of preparation might be made ahead of time? This slide, which I will not be dissecting in detail, is a poster I prepared to explain to staff the legislative background behind the need for inclusion, the UDL framework, its implications on the ground, and how the digital badge training works. No doubt it will be available with this PowerPoint, and it is scaled to print in A1 if necessary. So what about other areas of actively moving forward? Let's start at the top of the inclusion pyramid this time. Approximately 17% of FET learners register with our disability services. Pilot strategies in several areas of learner difference support will be trialled for goodness of fit. Many pre-recorded presentations explaining the many and varied examples of learner difference will be made available to all staff on the Cork CETB Work Vivo. We will continue to outsource bespoke training, and the Solace FSD fund will be expanded. Going forward, all of those registered with our disability services, not just the FSD qualifiers, will get platform, i.e. Moodle, Office 365 and Teams induction that's going to be paced to match their needs. Reasonable accommodations facilities will be enhanced, as will many physical facilities that need improvement. Raising awareness remains a priority, including LGBTI literacy, including digital literacy, and of course anxiety. Transitions within and throughout all of FET provision will be reviewed and enhanced, and progression opportunities will be improved. Online counselling will be available for all FET learners, and our equality and human rights audit of inclusive practices will have begun. We will continue to engage with and promote the learners' voice meetings, and we will endeavour to encourage all of our teachers, tutors and instructors to complete the UDL badge by 2024. Raising awareness of learner difference and the needs of teachers supporting same will remain a priority, as will the UDL badge. Access and inclusion services and facilities and all the documentation and reports that go with that will be enhanced throughout FET, and hopefully the lessons learned from this year will be embedded into our practice going forward. There is a lot of work done, and this slide summarises most of it. Like the poster a few slides up, this is also scaled to print in A1, but we have a huge menu of work still to do going forward. So how are the Cork CETB going to manage all of these planned improvements, you ask? But of course, new recruits have been sourced and appointed. In fact, the new team meets this week. We move from a position of one active inclusion officer doing all of the work to a team of 5 teachers from throughout the FET provision who will begin their dedicated active inclusion role in September 2021. We also have an active inclusion working group representing all areas of our FET provision, and this includes some members of our active inclusion network. Similar teams have been created in Entail, professional development, and other related areas. Active inclusion needs manpower, vision, and commitment to stay effective and active. Thank you for listening to what I've had to say. I hope there was something in it for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to connect with me. My name, my email address, and my phone number are at the bottom of this slide. Thank you, and stay well.
Thank you so much to Carol Neenan for being so generous and sharing all of her work in the area of active inclusion with us. While I was listening to Carol's presentation, I was thinking back to the afternoon active inclusion conferences that were scheduled and open to everyone, and they were hugely valuable at the time. And I just remember the strength of learner voice in those afternoon sessions was absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much to Carol. Okay, so here we go. Next up, we have the absolutely fabulous Carrie Archer. So Carrie has worked in the further education and training sector for 14 years. Her interests are professional learning and development, communities of practice, universal design for learning, and she is an active advocate for inclusion, diversity, social justice, and the visibility of LGBTQI+ learners within the FET sector. Carrie facilitates a professional learning network for learner support educators in FET colleges, and is a master mentor in technology enhanced learning and inclusive pedagogy, working collaboratively with a network of TEL mentors. Carrie is an associate faculty lecturer in National College of Ireland, where I get the pleasure of being alongside her on the team, working with FET educators in assessment, feedback, and learner support. But before I hand over to Carrie, I would just like to say a couple of words. When I floated this idea back after Christmas to Carrie about having a FET Fest, you know, straight off it was, are you mad? But then it was, I'm in, 2 feet, head first, straight in. Carrie sprinkles glitter on absolutely everything that she does. And when we were chatting about the schedule for FET Fest, I remember Carrie asking, you know, who is the high profile speaker? Who is the big name that we're going to have in for inclusive education? Straight off, there was only ever one answer. Carrie, that was you. Carrie brings inclusivity and diversity to everything that she does. Carrie, shine like a star on FET Fest.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Anybody who knows me knows I get totes emotional, so this was not a good idea for you to have done that. I should have just done the bio myself, which was the original plan. Wouldn't have been great, but there we go. Okay, I'm going to get started and recompose myself. So, as Ashley said, I am Carrie, Professional Learning and Development Coordinator, and the pronouns that I use are she and her. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is, so later on today, we're going to meet with Katie Novak and George Kouros, both authors of the book Innovate Inside the Box. A lot of my thoughts and reflections in this session are coming from that book and the connections that I've made between it and my own experiences and my own practice. And inward reflection is so important. Okay, so it's crucial to our growth and development. In fact, Caroline Martins, when she spoke yesterday in her piece on the power of us, said that transformation doesn't happen without reflection. And we're in Transformative Thursday. So I'm going to ask you to take out your pen and paper, get rid of the tech, just as if you had your notebook in a physical space. And I'm going to get you to divide it up with your colours and your markers or whatever it is you have. And I want you to look today at what challenges you. What has been affirmed, so taking out that glow piece as well, and what you're going to do moving forward about that particular thing. Because we often hear when we're in these things, you know, you've got people talking and you're sending emails in the background. I know, I've been there. But are you really listening? And I'm going to ask you to listen and see how you see, you feel, you hear and experience what's going to come up in this. So certain parts may be a little bit challenging and a little bit uncomfortable, but I've been known as a constructive irritant, so I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story and my own pathway to hopefully share some insights with you through a number of different lenses, and none of these can be separated or viewed in isolation. I want to speak to you as a teacher, as a researcher, as a parent, a leader, and just an individual interested in inclusion. And you'll notice that this segment has been titled, Do We Include or Exclude? And I didn't give you the title as to who or what. So this presentation is very much one where I want you to come to it with your own thoughts and experiences. And I want everybody to leave with a different FET Fest takeaway. Use the hashtag, we're on Twitter. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a few minutes as I waffle you through my story, right? So from a really young age, I was always aware that I didn't have a preference for the gender I was attracted to. And it never really occurred to me that other people may only have been attracted to the opposite sex only. Played loads of sport, really competitively as a young person. And I remember as I got a little bit older, starting to hear whispers and discussions and chatters in changing rooms about how members of the opposition were not safe to be around as a young woman. That members of other teams were practically men, and if I was around them, that I would in some way be turned or corrupted. And I remember having this overwhelming sense that I needed to keep myself quiet, that I needed to somehow withdraw into the background, go along with the majority, not raise my head above the pulpit, just go about my business so I didn't upset anyone. And I didn't feel safe to be me. Because I was bisexual, it was easy, or am, not was, it's easy for me to live a life of being half me, right? Because I could pretend just to be heterosexual, go out with guys, everybody thought that was fine. And I had my daughter at the age of 21, and then life became really complex. Because having lived as a straight woman and now with a child, the stakes of coming out got higher and higher. And at the age of 26, somebody, for some reason, no idea where this came from, they decided to start a rumour about me that I was bi. So I realised, oh, here's my opportunity. Carol there spoke about the universe. Well, the universe offered me a gift. But because I had a child, and there are so many stereotypes about bisexual people, I came out as being gay. So it's been a process for me of coming out over and over and over in different ways. Until I was 30, when I went to study on a PLC course in a FET college. And again, I went back in the closet. I was out in all of my other spaces in my life and not as a student for 2 years because I didn't feel that there was anybody else like me. There was nothing there that made me feel visible. And that was nobody's fault. Like, there's absolutely no blame here. And as my goal was to become a teacher, I made a promise to myself that when I managed to do that, that I was going to create a space for everybody so that everybody was visible and they'd see themselves. And immediately following the PLC course, I taught somewhere where again, I wasn't visible as a staff member. So it really made me think about this whole area. And that led me into my research. So my master's is actually education, training and management, and my specialism was in e-learning. So I actually spent 2 years trying to work out how am I going to turn a thesis into something to do with LGBTI. And what I did was I set up a research title and I used videos and different prompts using e-learning methods to try to get people to think. And I decided to go down the route of qualitative research and not a tick box questionnaire or survey because I wanted surveys and stories. And this was my title. Now, anyone who has researched knows how hard it is to get participants. I'll do any research for anybody having done this master's. Anybody asks me, this was impossible. At one stage, I could not get anybody. And I had posters, I went through every form, I went through every college, I did everything. For this piece of research, I was doing a really in-depth study of 4 to 6 participants, right, using a particular method called IPA. I could not get those participants out of the whole of CDETB because it's challenging to look at yourself in this space. And I'm so eternally grateful to the teachers who did this piece. But I'm going to talk you through some of the main pieces that emerged from this. So how do further education teachers contribute to the culture of visibility or invisibility? So first of all, let's get some of the language out of the way, just so we're really clear. The L stands for lesbian, woman attracted to woman. Gay can include lesbians, but it's generally man attracted to a man. Bisexual, attracted to both both genders. Transgender is to do with gender identity. Okay, being queer can be gender identity or it's to do with sexual orientation, and that can cover, I don't want to label myself under any umbrella, I'm anything in this, and you can work it out for yourselves. Intersex is where you can be born with genitalia that are different to your assigned sex, and then asexual, where you're not physically or sexually attracted to somebody else. And we're not going to go into this because that's not what this is about, but sometimes it's better to get some language out of the way up front. So I don't think it's a big shock to anybody to know that culture was one of the biggest things that contributes to the visibility or the invisibility of being LGBT. Now, the definitions of culture are as diverse as diversity, right? But generally it's the learned and shared knowledge and patterns of human behavior. So our communication styles, our customs, our values, and it deeply affects our perspectives, how we interpret things and the experiences that we have. So some of the things we found then that was, well, actually, you should be telling me from the top down. So our CDETB needs to give us the policies, then that will go down, it will filter down, and FE teachers will be really, really inclusive. And then when we questioned, well, what policies are in place or who puts those in place, it was put back to the teachers and the colleges. Well, each college has to come up with a policy, because if you buy into policy creation, then you've got a shared sense of contributing to this thing and there's more buy-in. So just putting that there. The next piece was, well, I want to be really inclusive, but I haven't been given any resources for it. So nobody has given me training. It's beyond my role. This is not something I came in to do, was to promote this as a particular area. And I'm not supposed to really be, doing this. So, and this was before my role as a PG coordinator, right? So this was a teacher to teacher. So I want to be inclusive, but who's going to help me and give me what I need? And then the next part was that we had a teacher who was talking about language. So this is such an important part of culture, and it came up massively through everything in my research. It was this whole idea that it's important to be explicit in the language we use. So hearing the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and using that language in the correct way was really important. But we need to know what the language is, right? So, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. Because if we're somewhere and other people are using language that we don't get, we shy away from it. And linguistic competence means a commitment to using the appropriate language. For example, using the preferred first name, the correct gender pronouns, the identity related terms. But it's important that we acknowledge that it's important to use the correct terms. So then we had visibility, right? So this was my next main theme that came up. And in terms of visibility, what emerged was we had a teacher who was really involved in media and in the whole creative area, theatre, all of these different things. And they were saying, lads, there's loads and loads of gay themes, right? So we're happy with this particular area. It's actually the business teachers that you need to be looking at. So those more, they don't necessarily embrace individuality and diversity as well as the creative ones of us do. And there was a sense that the more structured disciplines didn't quite embrace diversity the way they did. And then we had a business teacher who said, but actually there's nothing in my textbook or my module descriptor that says I have to do this. So it's not mentioned, and we've got loads and loads to get through. Like the syllabus is massive. I've got to get through all of these things. I can't go tagging on an extra piece to try to create a visibility. And as the interview went on, she started to identify actually loads of areas by talking through this where she could, if she shifted her lens, create visibility. So in employment legislation, business law, advertising, HR, recruitment policies, getting people to look through a different lens, but she just didn't think about it before because she'd never really reflected on it. And then we had a teacher who herself was lesbian, who was really clear on the visibility of staff being absent in her staff room, where she said that actually teachers mumble the word lesbian. They don't want to use these words out loud, and where she put herself forward all of the time as being the one, and it was seen that she was the one who was trying to push a particular agenda. And then the final theme we had was around identity. Okay, so identity then, our sense of being us. And the teacher who initially said in media that they were really inclusive, the more she thought about it, then she actually said, well, actually, I had this really, really difficult situation this year where they had a student who transitioned mid-year. So the student had started out at the beginning of the year who changed their gender expression. So they changed the clothing that they used. They started to use different pronouns and went from being Patricia to Peter. But physically, their anatomy was still very, very much female. So they were having major difficulties because they kept misgendering. They kept calling the student by the name that they used to use, and the student became extreme, that's called dead naming. But the student was becoming upset, but the teachers were getting so caught up in it that what they did was they stopped calling on her. They stopped calling on him, sorry, to actually contribute in class or to say anything, because just like there, they misgendered. Okay, so it was something that they became so nervous that they created an invisibility of that student. And then they started to think about this. So the teacher who kind of said that it wasn't in the hidden curriculum started to look a little bit more and said, well, actually, we're trying to get our students to go out into a workplace. So diversity and inclusion is really important in the workplace. And if you're going to be looking for jobs, then there's going to be times when you're going to get setbacks, and there's going to be times where you're going to actually have to be resilient and be able to be yourself. So creating a space in which students are welcomed and feel safe is really important. And we're going to look at that more closely. Because when we look at the LGBT+ community in Ireland, there's currently no official estimate, but it's about 5 to 7% over the age of 15. Could be potentially higher. So when we look at that and we look at experiences in a workplace, we see that 87% of people in a workplace in the most recent study in 2016 were out to some colleagues. Only 66% are out to all. So in that 20%, why are they not out to all? Right, so that's what's really, really interesting for me. And this is where yesterday Caroline's talk on collective efficacy really, really hit me. Because it was this idea that collective efficacy is about a unified whole, so your whole staff and the diversity within a whole staff coming together and being different from the sum of its parts, okay, than us as individuals. And she spoke about John Hattie's research, which said that if you have collective efficacy, right, this sense of working together among staff, it has the highest impact out of everything, including your teaching methodologies and strategies and all of the other things on student achievement. It's almost 4 times more impactful on student achievement than PD. Right, I thought that for me was the big piece that I took out. So if we look at collective efficacy then, some of the positive consequences of having staff who feel a really big part of something and something bigger than just them is that they'll have more positive attitudes towards inclusion. They're more likely to experience and extend trust to their colleagues, right? So now we're talking about that 20% that weren't out to all, being out to all. And there's a greater extent of teacher leadership. And that's what we're here today about, is about lifting us, about being transformational leaders. It also promotes, so collective efficacy promotes higher levels of student emotional engagement, as well as having an impact on their achievement. And this has positive consequences for our diverse staff, okay? So this idea, the sense of belonging. So we think about leadership. Stephanie Johnson has this fabulous book called Inclusify, right? So the power of uniqueness and belonging in innovative teams. And she looks at the intersection of leadership and diversity. So she talks about how we can be optimists, right? You intend really well. Yeah, I really want to be inclusive. It's really cool. I'm going to be there. But you don't actually initiate real change, right? So, and that can happen for loads and loads of reasons, such as fear. So fear that you're going to be challenged, fear of putting yourself out there, fear of what's everybody going to think of me if I go against the majority here. So there's a fear of someone saying, right, well, you've said this, but what are you doing about it? And then there's the fear of once you start to try to include one minority group, our other group's going to start saying, well, what about us? Right, so you're not including us. Where an inclusifier doesn't just hope that things are happening, they act. Right, so they do something about it. They're public in championing their commitment to uniqueness and belonging. And leaders, and every single person in this room is a leader. Leaders who champion commitment to uniqueness and belonging, they prioritize inclusion and diversity. So it's not an add-on, it's important. It's the priority in what they do. And they recognize the power that diversity brings to their spaces. So the different approaches, the different life experiences, the different values and perspectives, they embrace that. They create spaces where it's okay to be different, to be authentic, to be safe, and to know where we belong. And this is back to Caroline's talk yesterday, the power of us. Learning from different experiences and knowing that if we have a diverse workforce, that the experiences and the challenges that they've been through make our teams and our staff and our classrooms better. What they bring to it from life experiences is powerful. The next thing is, like I've said, language, okay? So knowing the language that you can use is really, really important. So the language that we all use it's something that we need to learn about, okay? And I'm going to give you links to how you can do that at the end of this. So do your learners and your colleagues hear and see themselves, right? So do they belong? Is their uniqueness embraced? Have we made them visible? Do we include or do we exclude? Aiko Bethia is the author of a book, Inclusivity at Work, right? The Art of Hard Conversations, and these can be hard conversations. And she speaks really, really clearly about like really listening, right? So the power of listening and inviting those with lived experience to the table. Do not go creating stuff without having the voices of your diverse groups at the table. So if we want to truly be collaborative, we don't just listen to the loudest voices, we listen to all voices. And it's about us questioning, is our leadership transactional or transformative? So transformative or transformational leadership in equity, diversity, inclusion is about relationships. It's not checklists. And the one thing we've learned this week is that relationships are so important in everything that we're doing. If we see ourselves, hear ourselves, the language that includes us, we know someone cherishes us wholeheartedly for being ourselves, where we're seen and not hidden, we can reach our potential. But it isn't always that easy, and I'm not saying that it is. For years as a teacher, I was not out with my students. And I was going out and giving workshops about this around the country, and I couldn't do it. So we're back to that fear, okay? So it's really important. Are you an optimist or an inclusifier? And what do you need to do to become an inclusifier? So this is where challenging normativity, and in this case, heteronormativity and cisnormativity. So the idea that everybody is cisgender means that you're not trans. Who's represented in your materials? Is it the cohort of learners in front of you that you're representing? Are there stories that you use that just go along with the majority, or are you giving a different sense? How and why are we perpetuating norms in our admission processes, in our application forms, in our classrooms, our materials, the stories we tell, the images we use, the assessments we set, the cultures we create, and the space that our learners and colleagues exist in? So what and how and why are we perpetuating these norms? So a wise man, who myself and Ashley will have the absolute pleasure of introducing to you this evening, once said that we have to challenge ourselves and we need to learn more. George Couros asserts that if we want to be a master teacher and master educator, you have to be a master learner. And to truly be whole educators and to model change, maybe that means stepping outside your comfort zone. Looking at the sheet of paper that you've got beside you, really reflecting on what it is that we can learn about our LGBTQIA learners. What can we learn for them and what can we learn from them? And what better way to learn about diversity than to learn alongside and with others? But we need to challenge ourselves because we're more than modules, we're more than the subjects, and we're more than the grades, and we're more than the assessments. And Maya Angelou, one of her sayings really sits out for me this year, right? And that's, right, today you've been doing your best until you know better. But when you know better, you need to do better. So individually and collectively, how can we do that? Because resilience is about learning from struggles. It's about finding a pathway to deeper meaning and purpose. So are we staying in our own comfort zone and doing what we've always done? And is that the best for the learners and those we work with? And again, this is from Innovate Inside the Box with George and Katie, who we're going to meet later too. So I want you to go back to that sheet of paper. I prompted you to inwardly reflect, and we should always be trying to get our students to reflect. And I want you to take, because taking time to reflect is critical if we want to be expert learners and we want to innovate. This is about making the invisible visible, right? So I use this through the lens of somebody who was an LGBT learner and a staff member. But this is about inclusion in general. It's about building your powers of observation. It's going back to Laura's Monday session where she brought us to a space to consciously connect. But we can't make those connections if we don't listen. Listen to ourselves and listen to others, to the voices to those who may previously have been excluded, and ask them how or why do they want to be included? How can we make them visible? We also heard Caroline say yesterday, and I said it at the start again today, transformation doesn't happen without reflection, and reflection can be challenging. It challenges me every single day, and deep, critical, embedded reflection is important. So reflecting on this session, what's the one thing in your column 3 that you're going to commit to do tomorrow? As part of Future FET Friday, you can do one thing to move forward. I want you to highlight it, I want you to star it, I want you to mark it, whatever it is, but I want you to make a promise to yourself. You can also put it on a FET Fest takeaway if you really, really want to put it out there and commit to it. And I want you to understand, you might not be able to make waves now, but you can make ripples. And you have no idea the impact of even introducing yourself with your pronouns at the beginning or changing your pronouns on your email signature can have to create a visibility and a safe space for somebody. So what I want you to say is, just to look at this fine, I'm going to leave with Brené Brown because she's one of my favourite ever leaders. I want you to see that this involves being vulnerable, right? And that's where love, belonging, joy, courage, and creativity and empathy happen. And it's about being authentic. So I want you to go out of this being brave, being awkward, but being kind. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Wow. Fantastic. You know, I think the power of posing that question and getting us to really think about our interactions and, you know, what we do and how we do it and all of those things, it is so powerful. I was doodling myself there, you know, and it's kind of, it's one of those things, and I think it's so right, you touched on it at the beginning, you know, it's so easy to say I'm inclusive or I support diversity, and I'm talking about myself when I say that, you know, and I think that because the term sometimes can be bandied about so much, it just gets taken for granted that if I put my hand up, I can say, of course I'm inclusive to everyone, you know. And I think that piece this morning was so powerful for sparking reflection on that. So to the chat, let's see. I'm just going to scroll back up.
Don't ask me anything too hard, lads. Don't push me.
A lot of this is wonderful comments, Carrie, but we have one here. You know, what you were saying, Carrie, is groundbreaking. For years, the boundaries mantra has been repeated constantly within this sector. You are blowing that apart. Someone mentioned the word safety within a session yesterday. To ask a rhetorical question, does everyone feel safe to be themselves, either as a staff or a learner?
Yeah, I think that's it, and it's not really a rhetorical question, Sheena, because I think that in terms of safety, you know, some cultures, there's some spaces that we go into that feel safer than others, right? So we know that if you're going down a dark lane somewhere and you don't know what's going to happen, do you feel safe? Absolutely not. Are there spaces that I walk into where I don't know, is it okay for me to hold the hand of my wife? No, there are spaces I go into where I don't feel safe to do that. So it's about thinking, if you go into a space where you don't feel safe as an individual, what is it that stops you from feeling safe? Right? So what is it about that particular environment that makes you feel unsafe? And then you're trying to think about that. Sometimes it can be an atmosphere. So if I walk into somewhere, and this is not about painting the front of your colleges with, you know, a rainbow flag. That's not what this is about. But it is about, are there posters up there? In Stand-Up Week, do you do something for your students? Because it's not just for post-primary. Stand-Up Week happens in November, and it's about creating kind of spaces or visibility for LGBT people. But you can take that to a whole different level. It's not just about the week, right? And I think this is where sometimes we can go wrong. We stick a week on, And all of a sudden, right, so oh, we did that, right, that's that piece done. And now we've got Trans Day of Visibility, that's grand. So I sent out a tweet about Trans Day of Visibility, so I've got that done. These are the micro things that you do about it. And this is where it goes back. Caroline spoke yesterday, and Aiko Bethia speaks about this as well. It's about this action bias. So something happens that make you be reactive. Right, so you're not being proactive and you're not building and having conversations and trying to create these spaces and having those hard conversations to do them. You're reactive and you're trying to stick something really, really quickly in place as a plaster. That's your action bias. So it's really important that you look at the spaces and you have conversations and open conversations and hard conversations with management to see, are we doing this? Let's be honest about it. Let's bring everybody's voices to the table. Not, I think we're doing a great job, lads, you know. So that's my piece about safety, Sheena. And that's where I'm going back to. It wasn't the college's fault or the staff room's fault that I didn't feel safe to be out. Like, they didn't know that they weren't doing that. And I wasn't going to challenge it because I just wasn't confident enough at that stage to do it. So yeah, it's about that.
Sheena's come back to you on that there, Carrie, there are 365 days in the year. So yes, I agree totally with you. A week is a token gesture.
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. You're right. But it's a start. And it can push some people out of their comfort zone by forcing them to do something. So that can be good as well.
I think we're going to find you in the Pride room today over on Kumo Space, Carrie.
We are. I am going to be heading over to the Pride room on Kumo Space. And this is like chat with the author. So if there was anything that you want to ask me, we can move into a bubble somewhere. If you wanted to ask something, I'm going to be down at the back because it is Pride Month. So I'm really delighted that I've had an opportunity, and I know people didn't know coming into this session when we're talking about inclusion or exclusion what it was going to be. So hopefully people got something out of it. But yeah, I'm going to be in Kumo drinking coffee, standing by a Pride flag, and I would love to have people join me there. So thank you.
The colours in that room are fantastic. It's a real happy space. So on that, Carrie, I just want to remind people, I think, about your call to action at the end there, because I think it's really, really important. You know, what's your one thing? And I think we'll wrap that up there. But thank you so much for such an honest, frank, and thought-provoking session, Carrie. You're inspirational. Thank you.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you to Carol Neenan and Carrie for taking this session and really encouraging us to reflect on whether we include or exclude. Thank you all.